Wakana Gojou, an ordinary student with no friends and always indoors like yourself, spends most of his time perfecting traditional dolls. While his classmates chase trends and social clout, Gojou finds peace in sewing, although he tends to keep it a secret, afraid of being bullied. That is, until one day a popular yet slightly questionable classmate accidentally stumbles upon his secret. But instead of laughing, she reveals her secret love for cosplaying. Having grown up in his grandfather's home, Gojou developed a deep admiration for Hina dolls his grandfather crafted. To him, they were the most beautiful things he ever seen. Inspired, he devoted himself to mastering the delicate art, determined to one day match his grandfather's skill. But his passion came at a cost. His dedication, which he wore like a badge of honor, became the very thing that drew him mockery. One day a girl, Nobara, caught him in the middle of his crafts, and to her it was weird, disgusting, and nothing a real man should be doing, and unknowingly caused his trauma since then. Fast forward to the present, Gojou is now a high school student, still just as obsessed with crafting Hina dolls as ever. He continues to live with his grandfather, who often reminds him not to overwork himself, especially when it comes to practicing his brushwork. Perfection takes time, Kaoru says, 48 years to be exact. But beyond the technical advice, Kaoru has a deeper concern, whether Gojou has made any friends since starting high school. The question catches Gojou off guard. Flustered, he replies that he has made friends. They're just, tied up with club activities and all that. In reality, Gojou was lying through his teeth. He hadn't made a single friend, not unless you count the guy who mistook him for someone else. Like you, he felt like a failure at connecting with anyone. His obsession with becoming a kashirashi, a master artisan of Hina doll heads, had become more of a curse than a dream. It left him isolated, unable to talk about the one thing he loved most without feeling completely detached from reality. And just as he started wondering if the world might spin a little smoother without him in it, bam. Enter Marin Kitagawa. Well, more like crash into Marin Kitagawa, who somehow managed to yeet herself into the air and slam the back of her head against his desk. Miraculously, she was totally fine. But as she got up, she noticed something odd. Gojou had ink smeared across his right arm. Mr. Awkward over here tried to brush it off with a nervous "it's fine," even though it very much wasn't. To her surprise, that only made her more intrigued. In fact, Marin was the polar opposite of Gojou, for she's cheerful and social. Despite that, one of her friends, Sugea Noa, revealed that Marin had turned down a handsome dude for mocking her liking to anime and manga figurines. Her friends thought that she was a tad too cold towards him, but Marin made it clear that the dude knew about her interests and yet decided to mock her for it. As the conversation kept going, Gojou was surprised as he watched from afar that someone from a different world than his is being accepted for who she is without any worries. After class, Gojou stayed behind to clean on behalf of two classmates. He knew it was a pain, sure, but honestly, scrubbing floors felt easier than fumbling through awkward small talk. As he got to work, he was caught off guard when Marin walked in. Apparently, she was also assigned to clean the classroom. What surprised her, though, was finding Gojou doing all the work alone. She was clearly pissed, learning that everyone else had ditched, leaving him to handle everything. She called it out for what it was: they were using him. Gojou shrugged it off, saying he didn't mind if it meant people saw him as reliable. That didn't sit right with Marin. She told him, gently but firmly, that bottling everything up just to keep the peace wasn't healthy. He needed to start speaking up for his own sake. Later that night, while cutting fabric for his next doll outfit, Gojou slipped and sliced his hand. As his grandfather fetched bandages, Gojou sat there quietly, Marin's words echoing in his head. Then, as if the night couldn't get worse, his sewing machine sputtered and died. When his grandfather returned, Gojou calmly broke the news. But something had shifted in him, and after a moment of silence, he looked down at his tools, and an idea began to take shape. The next morning, Gojou made his way to the school's sewing practice room, planning to quietly use the machines to continue working on clothes for his precious Hina doll. He figured no one ever used the room, so what could possibly go wrong? Right in the middle of his peaceful, weird session, the door creaked open. Gojou fumbled to hide his doll but lost his grip. He dove across the room in a full body save to catch it before it hit the floor, only to look up and see Marin standing over him. He braced himself. Surely this was it. The mockery, the public shaming, the you sew dolls moment, but it never came. Instead, Marin lit up. She was actually impressed, not just by the fact that he could sew, but that he came from a family that made Hina dolls. And when she learned he could make clothes, she immediately started undressing. No, not like that. Calm down. She was wearing a maid outfit, well, attempting to wear one, and wanted to show him what she'd made. Turns out, she was trying to cosplay as her favorite character, Kuro Shizuku. Gojou took one look at the outfit and, in full critic mode, tore it apart. Uneven seams, sloppy stitching, fabric choice, tragic. He went in hard before realizing, oh crap, did I just crush her dreams? He scrambled to apologize, expecting her to be upset. But Marin, she just smiled. She wasn't mad, she was determined. She admitted she sucked at sewing and wanted to get better. She wanted to cosplay properly, and for that, she needed his help. With tears welling in her eyes, she asked if he'd make her outfit. And Gojou, overwhelmed, confused, and still not sure what a Shizuku-tan even was, agreed. Marin was over the moon. Gojou, meanwhile, had just unknowingly agreed to the wildest collaboration of his life. Since Gojou had no idea what kind of universe Shizuku came from, Marin took it upon herself to explain, diving into details that Gojou would have gladly gone without hearing. At first, he thought she was joking, but her intense enthusiasm and the spark in her eyes made it clear she was dead serious and deeply invested in the lore. No matter how twisted or bizarre the game's world seemed, Marin remained completely devoted, no, obsessed, with her beloved Shizuku. Gojou, socially awkward but still grounded in reality, wouldn't normally involve himself in this kind of cultural deep dive. Yet something about Marin's passion struck a chord with him. When you truly love something, nothing else really matters. That much he could understand. Inspired by that, he agreed, this time with renewed motivation, to make the Shizuku cosplay for her. Fortunately, Marin had a solid starting point, a beginner's guide to cosplay making, complete with crystal clear instructions. Gojou couldn't help but wonder how Marin had managed to mess it up. Since it was already too late in the day to start, he decided to begin sewing on Monday, a decision that left Marin both grateful and excited. That night, Gojou's grandfather informed him they wouldn't be working the next day. They were expecting the arrival of a new sewing machine. As Gojou reflected on everything that had happened earlier, something on the cosplay guide Marin had given him suddenly caught his attention, stopping him in his tracks. The next morning, Gojou was startled to find Marin standing at his front door. Apparently, waiting until Monday was too much for her to bear, so she took matters into her own hands and tracked down where he lived, much to his shock. As if that wasn't bold enough, she bribed her way in with a cheesecake, completely catching Gojou off guard. Things escalated quickly when she casually wandered into his room, the one place no one but his grandfather had ever entered. Panic mode activated. By the time Gojou managed to collect himself, Marin was already standing in front of him, ready to have her measurements taken. That's when an issue came up. The guide stated that this step would require her to be in her underwear. Marin, unfazed, thought ahead. She wore a swimsuit underneath her clothes, figuring it might help keep Gojou from totally melting down. What could possibly go wrong with a plan like that? As it turned out, everything. Once again, it took Gojou a moment to steady himself before approaching Marin to take her head measurements. But just as he got close, she startled him by suddenly opening her eyes, completely throwing him off. Trying to regain control, he asked her to turn around so he could measure her shoulders instead. Unfortunately, that didn't make things any easier for obvious reasons. Still, he reminded himself that he couldn't let her down, not after seeing how passionate she was about bringing her beloved Shizuku to life. That thought alone helped him push through. After he finished the standard measurements, Marin brought up an extra detail. Kitagawa's shoes would need to be custom fitted, meaning her foot measurements were essential. Off-the-shelf footwear wouldn't do, it would hurt and be uncomfortable. Determined to accommodate, Gojou went to get her a chair, only to return and find Marin already making herself comfortable on his bed, wrapped in his sheets. Despite his protests and frantic excuses, Marin simply waved them off and got her way, as usual. Just when Gojou thought the worst was behind him, Marin casually requested that he measure her chest, claiming it was impossible to do it accurately on her own. Somehow, Gojou powered through the task, though visibly flustered. Marin, completely oblivious, chalked up his reaction to crouching too long, unaware of the real reason behind his nervous breakdown. But the final straw came when she asked him to measure the distance between the tops of her hips. This time, Gojou flat out refused. Hesitant but honest, he explained why, and Marin, amused, teased him briefly before agreeing to take care of that measurement herself. She called out the number for him to note down, but by then, Gojou's brain had short-circuited. For someone like him, the whole experience was more than enough to leave him emotionally fried. Lastly, Gojou moved on to taking the inseam measurements, which went surprisingly smoothly, at least until he noticed Marin's face suddenly turning bright red. Assuming the room was just too warm for her, he made a mental note to open a window next time. Before heading out, Marin handed Gojou a stack of reference materials he had asked for, essential for nailing the details of the Shizuku outfit. That night, Kaoru returned home after spending most of the day out buying a new sewing machine. To his surprise, he found his grandson deeply focused, buried in books and notes. Kaoru raised an eyebrow, quietly assuming Gojou had finally reached that age and was simply becoming more open-minded, but his surprise only grew when he realized what Gojou was actually doing, seriously taking notes, diligently studying the material in front of him. Marin was absolutely ecstatic when she tried on the finished outfit. It fit her perfectly, just as she had hoped. Before Gojou could hand her the wig to complete the look, he noticed something strange. Kitagawa was starting to act more and more like Shizuku, mimicking her personality and mannerisms with uncanny accuracy. Just as things began to feel a little too real, Gojou suddenly realized it was all a dream. Waking up flustered, and painfully aware of his body's reaction. He turned away in embarrassment and sheepishly asked one of his Hina dolls to look the other way. When Gojou arrived at school, he was still visibly rattled from everything that had happened. He did his best to stay under the radar and avoid Marin altogether, but, of course, that plan fell apart almost immediately. Spotting him in an instant, Marin excitedly rushed over, chatting nonstop about how she'd curled her hair that morning to better match her cosplay. Before Gojou could even process that, her friend Noah jumped in, eager to join the conversation. Moments later, Dea and Rune joined as well, forming an unexpected crowd around him. Sensing his discomfort, Dea gave him a curious look and remarked that he didn't seem too thrilled with the attention. Marin, completely unfazed, just waved it off and grinned. "He's not bothered at all," she said confidently. "Right, Gojou?" Before the first class began, the girls decided to make a quick trip to the vending machine, waving goodbye to Gojou as they headed off. Left behind, Gojou stood there quietly, still surprised by how Marin continued to treat him exactly the same as she had over the weekend, warm, open, and completely unbothered by how others might see it. Unfortunately, not everyone felt the same. He couldn't help but overhear whispers from a few nearby girls, wondering aloud if Marin was seriously dating a guy like him. The word stung more than he wanted to admit. Since then, Gojou had been going out of his way to avoid Marin, making excuses, slipping away between classes, even outright hiding whenever he saw her nearby. Naturally, this didn't go unnoticed. Frustrated and confused, Marin finally managed to corner him after a long day, catching him just as he was about to leave school. She excitedly asked him to go shopping with her right away. With the attention of several students suddenly on him, Gojou panicked. He quickly declined and bolted, trying to escape the situation entirely. Just as he thought he was in the clear, Marin appeared out of nowhere and startled him, yet again. This time, she wasn't letting him off the hook. She asked him straight up why he'd been avoiding her. And when Gojou finally mumbled out his awkward reasoning, Marin couldn't help but laugh and tease him about acting like they were dating already. Without giving him a chance to respond, she grabbed his hand and dragged him along, shopping plans back on track. To Gojou's surprise, the cosplay scene was far more popular than he had expected. There were tons of people genuinely passionate about it. Marin, on the other hand, was taken aback by the level of detail in the blueprint Gojou had created for the outfit. It included an extensive list of materials needed and a meticulously written breakdown of how each component should be crafted, every stitch and seam accounted for. The only exception was the shoes, which the guide recommended buying from a specialty shop. As for the collar, Marin decided she'd take care of that part herself, wanting to find one that felt just right. As they continued gathering materials, Marin listened closely while Gojou explained the unique characteristics of each item and the differences between various fabrics and components. Just as Gojou suddenly realized he had no cash on hand for the shopping trip, Marin reassured him with a confident smile that she had enough money to cover whatever they needed. Reluctantly, Gojou accepted her offer, grateful to keep the project moving forward. After finishing up with the fabrics for the outfit, Marin decided to take Gojou to a shop called Swallowtail to pick out the wig. Gojou was immediately impressed by the stunning variety and quality of wigs on display. Just as Marin reached for a black wig, Gojou gently suggested that a wig with a subtle purple tint would be a better choice. It matched Shizuku's actual hair color and complemented the overall style of the outfit much more accurately. He also recommended going for a longer wig, since the medium-length one she was eyeing wouldn't quite capture Shizuku's distinctive length and style. Marin agreed with his reasoning and added that she planned to take the wig to a professional stylist who would trim it to match Shizuku's haircut perfectly. Having Gojou's input felt like a blessing to Marin. She realized she might have made some wrong choices on her own. For Gojou, this was a rare and rewarding moment, finally feeling genuinely useful and appreciated. There was one last stop on Marin's shopping list to complete the outfit, the lingerie store. True to form, she dragged Gojou along, fully intending to tease him throughout the visit. Despite the playful teasing, Marin genuinely appreciated all the help he'd given her so far. To show her gratitude, she treated him to a refreshing bowl of chilled soba afterward. As they enjoyed their meal, the conversation naturally drifted to the more open-minded and sometimes surprising topics from Shizuku's universe. Their animated discussion caught the attention and occasional shock of nearby patrons who had no idea what the two were talking about. On their way home, the two continued chatting about where Marin might wear her outfit if she attended upcoming events, large-scale photo shoots, meeting other fans, and all the excitement that comes with it. Gojou was surprised to learn that photos could be uploaded online, like those of Juju-san, a talented cosplayer Marin admired who rarely even showed up to events. As Marin enthusiastically talked about her favorite cosplayers, she noticed Gojou hadn't said a word. It wasn't that he wasn't interested, rather, Gojou had always held a very different, more personal view of beauty since childhood. Marin didn't mind at all. In fact, she admitted she was picky about certain things herself. One example, the meat-wrapped onigiri she couldn't resist buying whenever she had the chance. Before they parted ways, Kitagawa thanked Gojou sincerely for his dedication. His effort to play Slippery Girls 2 and his meticulous commitment to designing Shizuku's costume had made her happier than she ever expected, especially since most people who tried to play the game for her never seemed as genuine. Grateful, she decided the best way to repay him was by emptying her wallet in his favor. Though she wasn't thrilled when Gojou thought that she might gain weight from how much she'd eaten that day, she admitted she'd need to watch her diet carefully for the next 2 weeks leading up to the event. As she walked away, Gojou couldn't help but start to panic about the looming deadline. Once he got on the train to head back home, Gojou began to consider what he should be doing the moment he got there, since making clothes for Hina dolls would often take him about a month, let alone making clothes for an actual human being. To him, it all became a race against time. When Gojou got back home, his grandfather was pleased to hear he'd been out with a friend. Kaoru initially assumed Gojou must have bought some video games or something typical for a teenager, but he was completely shocked to discover that Gojou had actually bought some girly lingerie. The surprise hit Kaoru so hard that he ended up in the hospital. At the hospital, Gojou was greeted by his cousin, Marin Kitagawa, who had rushed in out of concern for their grandfather's well-being. Fortunately, Kaoru was fine, though he needed to spend some time at Miori's place since it was closer to the hospital. Before leaving, Kaoru asked Gojou to fetch his brushes. Hearing about Gojou's grandfather, Marin sympathized deeply and hoped for a swift recovery. She also decided to exchange contact information with him, wanting to stay in touch in case he needed support. On top of worrying about the event deadline and his grandfather's condition, Gojou suddenly remembered his midterm exams were coming up the following week. The stress of juggling everything began to weigh heavily on him. That evening, things didn't get any easier. Gojou received a call from a customer requesting a tour of his shop the next day, accompanied by a friend who was returning to France shortly after. Though reluctant, Gojou eventually agreed to host the visit. Despite the brief panic, Gojou pushed through the hectic week, managing to complete his exams. While the rest of his classmates celebrated, Gojou had no time to relax. His mind was already consumed with planning the next steps for Shizuku's outfit. So dedicated was he to finishing the project that he even lost touch with Marin for a while. For her part, Marin was worried about how Gojou had been acting lately, but she chose to assume the best. That night, she quietly ate the snacks she had planned to share with him, all by herself. Meanwhile, Gojou was so overwhelmed and unwell that the whole house felt like a whirlwind of chaos. To make matters worse, he hadn't finished the outfit, nor had he delivered the brushes to his grandfather, who had once told him it would take 3 days to get used to holding them again after an injury. In Gojou's case, so much time had passed that he began to doubt whether he was even cut out for creating Hina dolls anymore. The more he thought about it, the deeper he sank into despair until tears finally welled up. But then he remembered something his grandfather had said. Though doing the same painstaking work over and over is tough, it's seeing the smiles of his clients that kept him going. That memory sparked a light inside Gojou. He recalled why he had started making the outfit in the first place, to see Marin's smile. With renewed determination, he picked himself up and got back to work in earnest. Before she knew it, Marin received a message from an exhausted Gojou. Her outfit was finished. She hadn't expected him to work under the assumption that she'd be using it for the upcoming event. Worried that Gojou might be upset about her not being clearer, Marin braced herself, but to her surprise, he was actually relieved to have some extra time to refine the outfit. Still, Marin struggled with the thought of putting Gojou through so much, especially with his grandfather's health concerns. Gojou, however, took responsibility for their communication gap despite having exchanged contacts. He felt this was the perfect moment for Marin to try on the outfit. After all, she was eager to become Shizuku Tan. As he helped her get dressed, they discussed the accessories she'd need. To his credit, Gojou had managed to track down some of the eyelashes Marin wanted, saving them from being reserved solely for the Hina dolls. While sharing his admiration for his grandfather's craft and his own dream of becoming as skilled, Marin reassured him with quiet confidence that he would get there one day. At that moment, Gojou smiled genuinely for the first time. Meanwhile, Marin's determination to embody her beloved Shizuku was so strong that she didn't hesitate to shave her eyebrows and redraw them to perfect the look. Once she was done with wearing her outfit, Marin called Gojou to finally evaluate how she turned out to be, only to be surprised that Gojou did call her out as Shizuku for a second, since she was perfectly identical to her idol, much to her delight. Despite Marin's excitement, Gojou was more focused on making sure the outfit was comfortable for her. However, he was genuinely shocked when he saw her creating little manual earthquakes with her hips. Before he could react, Marin confidently asked him to take a photo. As he snapped the picture, Gojou realized that if Marin truly wanted to embody her beloved Shizuku Tan, she needed to pose more like her. Together, they picked a background that suited the vibe better. There was just one problem. Marin couldn't stop smiling for the camera. She was simply too thrilled at that moment. It took a little while, but eventually, Marin slipped into character, allowing Gojou to capture photos where she perfectly resembled her idol. Marin loved the shots so much that she immediately uploaded them online. Inspired by the moment, she came up with a brilliant idea, inviting Gojou to join her at the event the next day. And so they did. Marin's excitement grew with every cosplayer she spotted. Her mind already daydreaming about her grand debut in the cosplay world. Gojou, on the other hand, was overwhelmed, nervous from the sea of girls and the many curious stares they received. He couldn't shake the feeling that everyone thought he didn't belong there, while Marin was convinced they were all in awe of her cosplay, and especially the bag carrying her melons. To help calm Gojou down, Marin led him to the plaza where other cosplayers had gathered. Just as she was about to get in line for photos, a photographer called out, recognizing her as cosplaying Kuro Shizuku. Delighted, Marin struck poses while the man snapped pictures. Spotting Gojou in the crowd, she reminded herself to stay focused if she really wanted to become Shizuku-tan. Before long, a growing line of people formed, each eager to take photos of her, and with every shot, Marin's poses grew more confident and polished. Gojou was glad to see Marin finally having fun, and was surprised to learn that drag performers were also part of the event. But as he reflected on the day, a bittersweet feeling settled in. Since he'd fulfilled his promise by making her cosplay outfit, he worried Marin might no longer feel any obligation to spend time with him. After all the fun they'd shared, that thought stung more than he expected. Before he could dwell on it, Marin came running toward him, tears in her eyes but smiling brightly. She was grateful he hadn't left her behind. Her outfit was starting to slip at the top, and the heat was making it hard for her to breathe. Without hesitation, Gojou led her to a quiet, shaded spot to help her cool down. Though they couldn't make it back to the clothing room, Gojou still managed to find a quiet, secluded spot where Marin could use some towels to wipe the sweat off her front. She managed to cool down a bit, but still needed relief on her back. At her gentle request, Gojou nervously unzipped the outfit slightly to let in some air, and carefully wiped the sweat from her back. Though worried someone might walk by and see, he trusted Marin's request and helped her, even when she later asked for more towels to freshen up elsewhere. Once she was ready, Marin insisted on returning to the plaza to spend a bit more time there, where she was set to meet Suzuka, whom she had bailed on earlier to maintain her outfit. As Suzuka began taking photos, a sudden gust of wind lifted Marin's skirt, revealing the shorts she wore underneath. The unexpected reveal shocked them despite the surprise. Marin quickly insisted Suzuka resume the photo shoot without missing a beat. All in all, Marin was thrilled with how the event had gone for her so far. Gojou, while admitting he'd had a lot of fun, felt a quiet sadness beneath the surface, convinced their friendship might end now that his promise was fulfilled. Or so he thought. To his surprise, Marin asked him to make another cosplay outfit, though she hadn't decided which character yet. Hearing this, Gojou felt a genuine spark of happiness and eagerly agreed to keep working for her. Marin, meanwhile, started searching online for a body mannequin to help with future cosplays. By the time she found one, Gojou was barely able to keep his eyes open. As Marin passionately talked about how much cosplaying meant to her, Gojou managed to tell her, "You look beautiful today." Given what he'd mentioned earlier about his complicated feelings around that word, Marin instantly turned, well, let's just say she turned red. Once they arrived at Gojou's place, Marin immediately took charge of washing the wig, insisting on doing it herself despite Gojou offering to help. He guided her through each step, giving calm and precise instructions as she worked. Before she realized it, Marin found herself quietly watching him. And for the first time, she truly noticed how good-looking he was, especially when he smiled at her. While they were at it, Miyori was driving Grandpa Kaoru back home. He still seemed uneasy about the idea of his grandson owning lingerie, but Miyori reassured him it was perfectly normal for someone his age to be curious or involved in those kinds of things. When Kaoru stepped into the house, however, he was stunned to find Gojou holding a frilly, girly outfit, only for Marin to suddenly appear from around the corner. For a moment, Kaoru stood frozen, confused by the scene. But after a bit of explanation, he began to piece everything together. Before long, Marin found herself watching Kaoru and Gojou deeply engaged in a discussion about the outfit, pinpointing minor flaws, tailoring tips, and areas for improvement. Seeing them talk so passionately and in sync made Marin realize something. She had fallen head over heels for Gojou. But just as she was about to speak, her stomach betrayed her, grumbling loudly in the quiet room. Embarrassed, she blushed hard, but was quickly surprised when her hosts kindly invited her to stay for dinner. As they shared dinner, the conversation turned personal, and the two youngsters discovered they had more in common than expected. Gojou revealed that he had lost both of his parents when he was a child, while Marin shared that her mother had passed away years ago. Her father, though alive and well, was still working abroad. Despite living on her own, Marin managed to keep herself going, relying on convenience store meals or cooking when she had the time. However, when she casually described the quality of her cooking, Kaoru and Gojou exchanged concerned glances, realizing it barely qualified as edible, let alone something you'd serve a dog. Without hesitation, Kaoru suggested that Marin start coming over for dinner from now on. Gojou agreed, and to their relief, Marin accepted the offer with a grateful smile. On their way to the train station that night, Marin thanked Gojou for his and his grandpa's warm welcome, before parting ways later. When she was all alone, Marin reflected upon what happened so far, as she thought about what would be wrong if she engaged with Gojou in any inappropriate activities, let alone saying that bluntly to his grandfather. By the time Kaoru was about to head outside, he was disappointed to see that it began to rain. If that wasn't enough, he was surprised to see a female student dripping wet, after being soaked from rain, that is. When Gojou got back home, his grandfather casually told him he had let one of Gojou's friends into the house, given the poor state she was in. He even asked Gojou to make her something warm to drink. But Gojou, confused and anxious, couldn't imagine who it could be. He didn't have any friends aside from Marin. Worried it might be a scammer, he cautiously approached the bathroom door. What he found, however, was far from what he expected. A short girl, completely as nature made her, who slipped in shock and rage the moment she realized Gojou had opened the door. Horrified, Gojou quickly apologized, properly bowing to the mystery guest, none other than Inui Sajuna. She had come to see him about the outfits, but Gojou assumed she meant clothes for Hina dolls, just like his grandfather had thought when he let her in, mistaking her for a friend of Gojou's. But the truth soon clicked into place. Sajuna was actually a year older than him, and what she really came for was to see the cosplay outfit Gojou had made for Marin. That part, however, she didn't reveal until after she'd done a quick look over of the Hina doll outfits, just to mess with him a little. Gojou tried to explain that he wasn't making cosplay outfits for profit, but Sajuna wasn't having it. Half joking, yet not entirely, she threatened to call the cops on him for seeing something he definitely wasn't supposed to, unless he agreed to make her a Juju cosplay. When she mentioned the character's name, Gojou started to piece things together. Sajuna was the Juju-san, one of the cosplayers Marin idolized. Sajuna admitted that she became interested in him after seeing Marin's cosplay at the event. She'd secretly followed him all the way home to find out who was behind the craftsmanship. As she explained this, Gojou quickly called Marin, who showed up in record time, nearly hyperventilating at the chance to meet her cosplay idol. She bombarded Sajuna with questions in a full-on fangirl frenzy. Once things calmed down, Sajuna formally made her request, a cosplay of Nikaido-shin, a character beloved by little girls for her strength and optimism, especially after her dramatic struggle against her villainous sister, Nikaido Neon. While Marin knew all the intricate details of Shin's lore, Sajuna admitted she didn't really follow the show. She just thought Shin looked cool, and more importantly, she admired the way the character kept smiling no matter what. Marin was thrilled but declined to cosplay as Shin herself, despite her love for the character. She felt that her body type and demeanor just didn't suit the role. Sajuna, visibly annoyed at Marin's Captain Obvious moment, grew flustered. Though she brushed it off, she found herself falling a bit for Marin, not romantically, but deeply admiring her as a cosplayer, which caused her to tear up before saying her goodbyes. Before leaving, she asked Gojou for his contact info so she could send over all the materials and details for the outfit. Still a bit suspicious of him, she made sure to warn, and don't get any funny ideas, I know you two are probably dating or something. Gojou's reaction to that? Well, it speaks for itself. As Marin kept on simping from the background, she couldn't help but ask Sajuna to participate in an event as duo cosplayers, only for the latter to promptly refuse the offer. By the time Wakana returned, Sajuna had shared even more details, most notably that she'd be renting a studio for her upcoming photo shoot. At first, she firmly declined Marin's suggestion to do a group cosplay together, not wanting to share the spotlight. But Marin quickly changed her mind by offering to split the studio rental costs with her. Before long, Gojou found himself roped in as well. Though he hadn't originally planned to be involved in the shoot itself, he agreed without hesitation, wanting to be by Marin's side, just in case anything went wrong. In the end, Sajuna realized that splitting the studio rental would free up more of her budget to spend on her outfit, so she reluctantly agreed to let Marin and Gojou tag along. For now, Marin, of course, was thrilled. Gojou, on his part, decided it was best to watch the anime in full to properly understand the characters and choose the right fabric for the cosplay. But since he'd never really interacted with people in a normal way before, he ended up proudly rambling about how he played through Slippery Girls 1 and 2 in painstaking detail, much to Sajuna's visible horror. To add to the chaos, Marin casually informed him that the anime he'd need to watch wasn't exactly a quick binge. It had a total of 126 episodes. The color drained from Gojou's face. After the girls left, Gojou sat down with his grandfather and told him how the meeting had gone. Kaoru reassured him that he was on the right track and shouldn't worry about the shop for now. Still, Gojou couldn't shake the concern that he might be getting rusty. He hadn't had much time lately to practice making Hina dolls. But before he could even voice his worries, Kaoru spoke up with a gentle smile. He'd noticed something. Gojou had actually improved. His movements were more precise, his touch more refined. Kaoru figured it had something to do with all the work Gojou had been doing on Marin's makeup, an unexpected form of training that had clearly paid off. The next morning, Gojou went to Marin's place to pick up the DVDs of the show. But as soon as she opened the door, he was met with a chaotic sight, Marin in a flustered state that instantly triggered some traumatic flashbacks involving her melons. She hadn't panicked over her outfit, surprisingly, but instead because she realized she wasn't wearing her colored contacts. Gojou, of course, was confused by the sudden panic. When she returned a few minutes later, she was in a hoodie with her contacts in, finally letting him in. Deep down, she was anxious about how he might see her without makeup. On the other hand, Gojou was just as nervous. It was his first time visiting a friend's house, and Marin was, well, his first real friend. Just as he thought he might pass out from the pressure, Marin casually suggested that they watch the anime together. That alone nearly pushed the introverted Gojou over the edge, especially when he realized he'd be stepping into Marin's room, which turned out to be a full-on Shizuku shrine. As they continued watching the anime, Gojou couldn't help but make thoughtful comments about the characters, discussing what he'd picked up so far about Neon and Shin, their complicated relationship, and how Tenjiji Mirai factored into the plot. His observations were sharp and sincere, and Marin found herself more and more impressed. The longer they watched, the more Marin started to feel like this was a home date. A quiet, cozy moment she wished would never end. At least until her stomach loudly interrupted her fantasy. Mortified, she quickly offered to cook something for both of them. Gojou initially agreed, until he remembered just how terrible her cooking was. Still, despite his polite attempts to intervene, Marin insisted on taking the reins in the kitchen, determined to be a good host. After looking at what she got in the fridge, she opted to make some omuris, which came with an opportunity to confess her feelings to Gojou. Although Marin started off strong, her plate ended up looking like a biohazard, so much that she didn't want Gojou to bother with eating it, only to be surprised that he genuinely liked it, which encouraged her to eat her own plate, before getting back to watching the show, where Liz and Neon's fight got Gojou in tears. Later that day, Gojou contacted Sajuna to let her know his sketch for the outfit was ready. Although she declined to see it in person, she was impressed by the meticulous detail he put into it. This led them to discuss the costs, and Sajuna agreed to send him the necessary funds. During their conversation, Gojou learned about some cosplay tricks, like using cosplay tape to change the shape of the eyes, though Sajuna suggested that flex tape might work even better. He was fascinated to discover these new techniques. Sajuna, meanwhile, was surprised to learn that the Shizuku cosplay was the very first outfit Gojou had ever made. Before ending the call, Sajuna mentioned that photos of her cosplay would be taken with her younger sister's camera, as she was skilled in photography and photo montage. Gojou then asked if he could meet her sister to learn how to use the camera. Sajuna agreed, despite some reservations, and arranged to meet Gojou near their family restaurant. After the call ended, Gojou told Marin about the plan, and she immediately decided to come along for the same reason. Marin was eager to meet the young photographer, imagining someone small and adorable. But much to her and Gojou's surprise, Inui Shinji was as tall as a Dutch woman, with a noticeably impressive pair of watermelons. Marin couldn't help but comment on it right away, or so Gojou thought. Marin grew even more impressed after seeing the photos Shinji had taken of her sister. It turned out that Shinji had actually come up with Sajuna's cosplay name and created her social media account to showcase her work, wanting the world to see just how beautiful Sajuna really was. Before long, Sajuna started receiving compliments from all over the internet for her looks and cosplay skills. But since Shinji managed the account, Sajuna often felt nervous and unsure how to respond, sparking the familiar bickering that defined their sibling relationship. Despite the occasional tension, Marin could tell Shinji's efforts came from a place of genuine love for her older sister. When asked, Shinji wholeheartedly admitted this, but of course, Sajuna played the tsundere card once again. Shinji explained that she'd learned photography from her father, who pursued it as a hobby. She went on to describe the different mechanics that help her capture great shots, the differences between a phone's camera and a professional camera's lenses, how lenses can blur the background or foreground, and how shutter speed affects the image. For Shinji, the greatest joy came from capturing the perfect expression in a photo. Curious, Marin asked if taking pictures of so many cosplayers had ever made her want to try cosplay herself, but Shinji politely declined. Still, she was totally cool with Marin borrowing her camera to give photography a try. When it came to the cost, however, Gojou nearly had a heart attack. The lenses were sold separately, and Sajuna didn't help matters by revealing that there was a lot more gear needed beyond just the camera and lenses. Despite all that, Marin's determination to buy the camera didn't waver. As they were leaving, Sajuna decided it would be a good idea to invite Marin and Wakane to check out the studio she planned to rent. Seeing how eager they were, she set a date and place for their meeting. If you're wondering, the studio was located in an old, abandoned hospital. Despite the eerie setting, everyone was excited to go, except Sajuna, who barely slept the night before. Wakane admired Sajuna's dedication, impressed that she'd chosen a location that perfectly matched the atmosphere of the anime's events. Meanwhile, Sajuna was quietly impressed that Gojou had actually kept his promise and watched the entire series. But as Gojou stepped inside the building, he quickly noticed something surprising. Sajuna was visibly scared of the place. Elsewhere, Marin thought the studio might be a little too dark, but Shinji stayed optimistic, insisting the lighting was perfect for a photo shoot. Soon enough, they noticed rain starting to fall and decided to move elsewhere. Meanwhile, Sajuna's bravado about fearing no one quickly backfired. Between the hospital's gloomy atmosphere and the rain, she was genuinely spooked. Still, she was determined to explore the place properly since she wanted to cosplay as Black Lily, a magical girl character she'd become obsessed with as a child. Gojou offered to scout the location for her if she'd just head back to the entrance, but Sajuna refused. This cosplay meant too much. She wanted to fulfill a childhood dream, no matter how scary it got. Sajuna recalled her first magical girl outfit from middle school, a horrendous creation, but one that filled her with joy because it marked the first step toward her dream. What really made her reach out to Gojou, though, was jealousy. Seeing Marin's dedication to her Shizuku cosplay made Sajuna want to entrust him with her own costume, no matter what. Gojou, in turn, was reminded of how he fell in love with making Hina dolls as a kid, inspired by his grandfather's passion for creating pieces that made people fall in love at first sight. Lost in thought, he suddenly lurched towards Sajuna like a slasher in a horror movie, then broke into a smile and thanked her for the inspiration, promising to do his absolute best on her outfit. Sajuna was so caught off guard by the sudden shift in mood that her brain just shut down. A few days after finishing his finals, Gojou was surprised when Marin immediately dragged him to the beach. He assumed she wanted to take some backlit photos, but Marin just gave him a blank look, clearly thinking she'd been obvious about simply wanting to hang out at the beach with him. As Gojou accepted that this was just classic Marin being herself, karma quickly struck in the form of a hawk swooping down and snatching Marin's burger right out of her hands. Although their food was stolen, Marin remained determined to have a great time with Gojou, so she decided to treat him to some tea. Seeing HW committed she is, Gojou decided to join the fun by throwing his bag of fresh fries at the hawk. Shout out to the Belgians, which was hilarious to Marin. After settling down, the two enjoyed their food and the gentle sea breeze. Marin soon hopped into the water, radiating a carefree spirit that made Gojou smile. But then, Gojou accidentally caught sight of something he definitely wasn't meant to see. Meanwhile, Marin was joyfully jumping around, clutching some seaweed she'd found, and beckoning him to join her in the water. Gojou, however, acted like he'd never seen water before. To Marin's surprise, this was actually Gojou's very first time at the beach. He explained that his childhood was spent entirely focused on making Hina dolls, leaving little room for anything else. Hearing this, Marin eagerly suggested they spend the summer vacation exploring lots of new places together, just the two of them. Gojou nodded gracefully in agreement. As Marin went to quench her thirst, she nervously confessed to Wakane that she wanted to be closer to Gojou. Flushing red, she freaked out a little until she noticed Gojou still enjoying the sea, covered in seaweed after a clumsy fall. She snapped a quick picture, amazed at how right Shinji had been about the magic of lighting in photography, before rushing to help the poor guy out of the water. The next day, Gojou and Marin returned to Gojou's place, carrying all the fabrics they needed for the outfits. Even better, Gojou had finally gotten the mannequin he'd requested, which made Marin genuinely happy. Then, without warning, she asked for Gojou's opinion on something he probably wished he could have avoided seeing, at least at first. It turned out to be just a swimsuit, inspired by their previous day's conversation about needing a high-waisted one for the cosplay. When Gojou didn't reply to any of her messages about it, Marin decided it was time to take matters into her own hands. Later, she realized that despite his silence, Gojou might have been secretly excited all along. But no matter how much she tried to tease him, her efforts were met with little reaction. Despite everything, Marin's excitement grew as she realized she was becoming genuinely useful in helping her beloved liege. Her words struck a chord with Gojou, who felt a similar sense of accomplishment when he finished crafting Marin's very first cosplay outfit. For a brief moment, the atmosphere was filled with mutual pride and joy. However, just as Marin was about to try on the jewel she had carefully colored, the mood nearly took a hit. She suddenly realized she was wearing the wrong melon basket underneath. The awkwardness of the mix-up threatened to derail their shared moment, but the two quickly recovered, their smiles returning as they carried on with the preparations. Once the outfits were ready, Gojou invited both Marin and Sajuna to try theirs on. Marin was absolutely bursting with excitement as she slipped into her costume, practically glowing with pride. Sajuna, on the other hand, had a few minor concerns about her outfit, issues she was confident could be fixed on her end, but overall, she was very pleased with how it had turned out. Watching her idol discuss the intricate details of their costumes left Marin feeling a bit overwhelmed. She even found herself trying to mimic Sajuna's way of speaking, though her nerves got the better of her and she struggled to get her point across clearly. To lighten the mood, Gojou helped Marin try on her wig. Sajuna chimed in with some helpful advice, especially about the coloring and styling, which made a big difference. Afterward, Gojou applied some cosplay tape Sajuna had given him to help perfect the look. When Gojou handed Marin a mirror, she was speechless, completely in awe of how talented Gojou was at transforming her into neon. For a moment, she forgot everything else and simply admired the reflection of her dream come to life. Once their outfits were all prepared, the cosplay group headed to the abandoned hospital again, where it began to rain after they got in. As they sat alone, Sajuna expressed her liking to Marin's outfit, before agreeing to have Marin take a picture with her and posting it on social media. As Sajuna kept on scrolling over Marin's profile, the latter began to receive a lot of replies. By the time Gojou returned, unexpectedly accompanied by a guest, Sajuna suddenly realized she had momentarily lost consciousness when Gojou had approached her with the stealth and intensity of a horror movie slasher. After they made their way downstairs, and Gojou apologized profusely for the scare, Marin decided to part ways with the group, with Sajuna following shortly after. Now alone with Shinji, Gojou seized the moment to ask her again if she had ever considered trying cosplay herself. To his surprise, Shinji admitted she actually wanted to give it a shot. She confessed she'd always been a bit jealous of her sister's boldness in cosplaying but had never dared try it due to her lack of confidence in her own appearance, a stark contrast to her sister's favorite character. In response, Gojou shared what he'd observed about the wide variety of cosplayers at the recent event he'd attended, reassuring her that her sister would never judge her if she decided to start cosplaying. Encouraged by this, Shinji finally relented and revealed the character she wanted to cosplay, Soma, from the same anime as her sisters. Gojou was momentarily stunned by her choice but held his comments, simply suggesting that she join Sajuna and Marin for their upcoming photoshoot. For her part, Shinji wasn't sure how realistic it would be for her to pull off the cosplay, much like Gojou. She wasn't physically built to portray a male character, and on top of that, her only source of income was a modest allowance. Despite these challenges, Gojou remained determined and confident that he could help Shinji bring the cosplay to life, no matter what it took. For starters, Gojou suggested that Shinji try on his own school uniform, hoping that if it fit, she wouldn't need to buy a new outfit. But as soon as she slipped it on, his concerns quickly turned into reality. A button popped off and nearly flew straight at Gojou's face. While carefully sewing the button back on, Gojou decided it was time to address the bigger issue, how to create the illusion of a more masculine physique. After some thought, he settled on using a sarashi wrap to conceal her cleavage and help give her a flatter, more boyish silhouette. After a while, Gojou returned to check on Shinji's progress. Although the fit had improved, he knew there was still room for refinement, especially around her already compressed chest and her shoulders. Determined to get it just right, Gojou did some research and discovered that those larger curves could be flattened effectively using special hooks. Since the solution was affordable, they decided to act quickly and make the purchase. But before buying anything, Gojou insisted on taking precise measurements. What followed was an epic saga of nervousness and awkwardness as Shinji panicked at the thought of being measured so closely. Eventually, Gojou managed to find a wig that closely matched Soma's hair, but when it came time to cut it, he found himself hesitating, unsure of the best approach. In that moment, Gojou couldn't help but reflect on how similar this situation was to when he first met Marin. Back then, he had admired her as confident, talented, and outspoken, only to realize she, too, had gaps in her knowledge. He definitely found her cute, but that was beside the point. As Shinji quietly pondered Gojou's words, he gathered his resolve and began carefully trimming the wig. Once the haircut was done, he smoothly shifted focus to applying her makeup, determined to help her fully embody the character. It soon became clear that Gojou's arrival with the unexpected guest was no joke. The guest was none other than Shinji, fully dressed as Soma, much to everyone's surprise. Sajuna and Marin instantly lit up, amazed at how perfectly Shinji embodied the character. Of course, Marin couldn't resist teasing and asked where Shinji's watermelons had gone. After getting her answer, Marin dove right back into fangirling over Shinji's cosplay and asked for a selfie, with Sajuna quickly joining in. With Shinji's enthusiastic agreement, the impromptu photoshoot kicked off in earnest. Amidst their photoshoot frenzy, Marin suggested striking some poses with Sajuna to really capture the essence of the anime characters. Though a bit nervous, Sajuna agreed to give it a try. Things started off well until Gojou noticed Marin gradually breaking character. By the time he gently warned her, Marin was already all smiles and completely out of character. Watching this, Sajuna couldn't help but smile, amused by just how much of an airhead Marin truly is. Once Marin and Shinji headed upstairs to take some solo shots, Sajuna stayed behind to thank Gojou for encouraging her sister to try cosplay. Though grateful, she insisted that he be fairly compensated for all his hard work on Shinji's costume. While she was glad to see her sister so excited about cosplaying as Soma, Sajuna couldn't shake the feeling that she'd somehow fallen short as an older sister. When Gojou gently pointed out that Shinji simply hadn't been able to open up about her true passions, Sajuna realized just how kind and understanding he truly was. While this discussion was taking place, Shinji was enjoying every bit of her time while taking photos of Marin, until suddenly her beholder snapped out of nowhere. At home, the Inao sisters continued fine-tuning the color correction on their photos. Sajuna, in particular, felt there was more to capturing beauty than just perfecting the outfit or tweaking colors. When it came to Shinji's cosplay, Sajuna openly expressed her pride in what her sister had achieved so far, admitting she herself would never have been able to pull off such a costume. Shinji was surprised to learn about her older sister's jealousy, but it made sense when Sajuna explained that she's very selective about the characters she cosplays due to certain limitations, unlike Shinji, who simply chose the character she loved most. Inspired by this conversation and the lesson Gojou had shared about the struggles everyone faces, Shinji resolved to start saving money for new and better cosplay projects once she enters high school, much to Sajuna's excitement. Though the day had been exhausting for Sajuna, Shinji had a great time, especially thanks to the presence of Gojou and Marin. Meanwhile, Marin was pleased to hear from Gojou that he had received the photo Shinji took, and she couldn't help but ask how it felt to do makeup on a guy, especially since the result had turned out so well. Marin also realized that the uniform Shinji wore was actually Gojou's, learning about Shinji's tight budget that made buying a new outfit impossible. Then, out of the blue, Marin asked Gojou if he had ever thought about making a cosplay for himself. Gojou quickly refused, explaining that it was actually Shinji who had asked him to help with the Soma cosplay right after they left the abandoned hospital. Marin was caught off guard, and a bit annoyed, realizing Gojou had spent time alone with another girl, something she hadn't expected at all. Now that summer vacation had finally begun, Gojou was thrilled to have more time to dedicate to practicing his craft, whether it was perfecting his Hina dolls or working on cosplay outfits. Just a few days ago, he had gone over to Marin's place to watch some anime together. Marin was especially excited because she planned to cosplay as a character named Veronica, whose striking outfit and captivating presence made her an irresistible choice. While Gojou didn't mind the complexity of the costume itself, he knew the real challenge would be replicating Veronica's distinctive tan skin tone, a stark contrast to Marin's fair complexion. While resting at home on a hot day, Gojou was deep in thought trying to solve the issue at hand when Marin unexpectedly showed up, freshly tanned, or so he thought. In reality, she had carefully applied foundation all over her body to achieve that look. Seeing Marin sweating profusely, she asked to use the shower, and Gojou kindly offered her some spare clothes. Though grateful, Marin couldn't resist teasing him a little. To Gojou's surprise and growing nervousness, she ended up using his soap and even wore his clothes afterward. She then pulled out the foundation she'd mentioned earlier, along with mascara, chains, and a roll of wallpaper for the cosplay. Unfortunately, she couldn't find any fake teeth at the market, but Gojou had anticipated this and made a few himself. Luckily, the custom teeth fit her mouth perfectly, much to Gojou's delight. Caught up in the moment, Gojou forgot to leave the room while Marin began to undress, causing him to blush furiously. Things took a turn when Marin accidentally hit the back of her head against the wall, making her unable to wear her wig for the time being. The next day, Marin took the lead and planned a trip to Shibuya to help Gojou pick out some new clothes. She was determined to be his stylist this time around. Once they arrived, Marin carefully selected an outfit for Gojou to try on and waited nearby with the vendor, who couldn't help but admire how stunning Marin looked in the bustling crowd. When Gojou emerged from the fitting room, both Marin and the vendor were genuinely surprised by how good he looked. But instead of settling on that first outfit, Marin decided to bring him out several more to try on, one after another, each somehow looking better than the last. After seeing Gojou in multiple stylish options, Marin found herself torn. It was surprisingly difficult to choose just one because he genuinely looked incredible in all of them. However, before she could make her final decision, Gojou confessed that none of the shirts felt quite comfortable on him. Understanding his concerns, Marin suggested they switch gears and try some plain t-shirts instead. The rest of the day unfolded with a warm camaraderie. They tried matching clothes, enjoyed a relaxed lunch together, browsed through accessories, shared some refreshing ice cream, and finally made their way back to the lively center of Shibuya, satisfied with the day's unexpected adventures. Things had been looking up for Marin until she finally asked Gojou when he would start helping her with her Veronica cosplay. That's when Gojou hesitated and revealed he'd have to pass this time. The outfit was simply too revealing for his comfort, and he didn't feel right working on it. At first, Marin was taken aback, clearly shaken by his refusal. But when she heard his shy reasoning, she burst out laughing, teasing him gently about his bashfulness. When the mood turned serious, Marin agreed that Veronica's outfit was indeed too revealing and promised to be more thoughtful about her choices in the future. Still, she was genuinely grateful for all the effort Gojou had already put into the project. Just as a comfortable silence settled between them, Marin suddenly tugged Gojou closer and whispered something in his ear. His face flushed a deep red once again, but then Marin grinned and admitted she was just kidding. Seeing that it's becoming increasingly hot outside, Marin took Gojou with her to a nearby manga cafe to cool off. For his part, Gojou grew increasingly uncomfortable, not just because of how close Marin was sitting, but also because of the way she was eagerly flipping through some pretty wild manga pages. Undeterred, Marin pulled a manga from her bag to read alongside him. If you're wondering about the title, it's probably as long as the name of this video, or any typical isekai anime title, except this one was actually a slice of life story. I won't go into what that means, but Marin especially loved this manga, often reading it before falling asleep. One of the reasons she was so drawn to it was because the main character sported half pigtails, a detail that inspired Marin's choice to cosplay as her. Hearing this, Gojou started to worry. After all, the character Marin wanted to cosplay, Liz, had a rather revealing outfit. On the other hand, Marin doubted she could pull it off because she wasn't sure if half pigtails would suit her, which earned her an intense look from Gojou. He quickly reassured her, insisting he'd be more than happy to make the outfit for her. Oh, and I should mention, Gojou didn't even know what a succubus was, so you can imagine his reaction when he found out. As he flipped through the manga and saw how silly the art was, he actually started to appreciate the peaceful, lighthearted vibe of the story. It was when Marin went to get some more manga before leaving the cafe that Gojou began to realize the challenges ahead. Liz's art style in this manga was noticeably simpler compared to the more detailed characters he had worked on before, which meant he'd need to be a bit more creative with the materials and techniques he had if he wanted to get the best possible result. Before they knew it, the two had left the manga cafe by evening, where Gojou asked if they could stop by a bookstore to get Sexai DK. Once he got back home, Gojou was ecstatic at the turn of events for today, especially with the pair of clothes he bought. A few days later, Gojou found himself in an awkward and unexpectedly uncomfortable situation, somewhere he really shouldn't have been. Here's how it happened. The day before, Gojou had told Marin that her cosplay outfit was ready. Marin then mentioned she had arranged her own photo shoot at a different location, explaining that Gojou's place didn't quite fit the character's mood. Since the alternative spot was affordable, Gojou agreed without much thought, unaware of just how unusual the venue really was. It wasn't until they stepped inside the room Marin had rented that Gojou started to understand where they actually were. The space featured a large bed eerily similar to the one shown in the manga, and the surprisingly low rental price had seemed like a perfect deal to Marin. She only realized the true nature of the place after booking it, and by then, it was too late to back out. While Gojou grew increasingly overwhelmed by the mature and suggestive atmosphere surrounding them, Marin surprisingly admitted to feeling curious about this kind of venue. She even mentioned that the place hosted other events too, like girls' nights and sweets-themed gatherings, which made the whole situation feel even more surreal. It was only when Marin stepped away to grab some more manga before leaving the cafe that Gojou truly began to realize just how challenging the task ahead would be. Unlike the richly detailed characters he had worked on before, Liz's art style in this manga was strikingly simple and much less intricate, relying on minimalistic lines and shapes. This meant that Gojou would have to push his creativity further than ever, carefully experimenting with different materials and techniques to find the perfect balance that would do justice to the artwork. The simplicity of the design didn't make the work any easier, rather, it forced him to focus intently on capturing the character's very essence through subtle, precise details, conveying personality and emotion without the aid of complex patterns or elaborate embellishments. Gojou began by conducting thorough research into succubi, only to discover that the manga's storyline did not focus on them directly. This insight led him to pivot toward designing an outfit with a cuter, more approachable aesthetic. Confronted with the character's differing height and the manga's intentionally simplified sketches, he needed to balance fidelity and creativity. So he introduced carefully chosen embellishments, subtle embroidery, playful accessories, and nuanced color accents to enrich the design without betraying the original style. At one point, Gojou worried that these additions might render the cosplay technically incorrect, but Marin reassured him that such doubts are natural. Fans often overthink their costumes, especially in situations like this where interpretation matters. She reminded him that capturing a character's spirit through thoughtful details is often more impactful than slavish replication. Given Gojou's history of imaginative, well-received cosplays, it became clear that his creative adjustments would only strengthen the final result. Before Gojou could properly thank her, Marin launched into an animated monologue about bizarre urban legends she'd recently uncovered, her eyes lighting up as she recounted each twist. Mid-bragging, she rifled through her bag in search of some joeys, small treats or tokens she thought might cheer him on, and presented one with a flourish. Gojou accepted it hesitantly, managing a grateful smile as he nibbled on the sweet. Once the sugar kicked in, he turned his attention to Marin, gently doing her makeup in the soft afternoon light, all the while assuring the unusually self-conscious Marin that she looked strikingly like Liz from Six-Eyed K. Buoyed by her confidence, Gojou even went so far as to purchase a few carefully chosen props afterward, determined to recreate signature scenes from the manga with both accuracy and charm. Once the backdrop was arranged and lighting tested, Gojou began photographing Marin in a variety of carefully chosen poses. Even when she tried to capture the mood by singing her lullaby during a shot, he managed to salvage the unexpected moment, producing an image that no one anticipated yet proved remarkably charming. In the height of their excitement, both suddenly realized where they were, sending Gojou into a brief panic as he and Marin found themselves in a rather awkward predicament. Fortunately, the hotel manager arrived just in time to inform them that their stay had been cut short.
Are you serious?
As they left the room, the two were so embarrassed that they didn't say a word. It has been a while since the two have met since then, where Gojou kept himself busy with working on his Hina dolls. As he noticed that it's about time that summer festivals were held, Marin texted him asking him for help. Marin struggled with her ribbons, and Gojou stepped in to help without hesitation. To his astonishment, she had already missed the chance to attend the summer festival when her father changed plans upon discovering her unfinished homework. Adding insult to injury, Gojou later visited one of the festival events without inviting Marin, convinced she'd be occupied with schoolwork, unaware that Marin had been so engrossed in her part-time modeling job that she had actually forgotten about her assignments. Her part-time role as an amateur magazine model, secured through determination and networking, involved professional makeup sessions for each shoot. Marin endured this hectic schedule not only to cover everyday expenses but also to save for her dream DSLR camera, an ambition that surprised her when she realized how deeply she cared about photography. After completing some of her homework, Marin decided to take a well-deserved break and invited Gojou to watch a horror movie together. Although Gojou was known to startle easily and Marin generally steered clear of scary films, she figured it was worth a try since the series' third season was about to premiere. After all, how frightening could it truly be? As the opening sequence played and jump scares began to accumulate, Marin found herself growing increasingly tense, clutching a cushion at each sudden noise. Surprisingly, Gojou seemed to relish the suspense, pausing occasionally to replay key moments for future reference. Despite their contrasting reactions, the shared experience ended in laughter and a newfound camaraderie once the final scene faded. Once they returned to their homework session, Marin suddenly realized she had forgotten her math drills at school earlier that day. Despite knowing it would be awkward to slip onto campus out of uniform, she resolved to retrieve them and convinced Gojou to accompany her on the mission. Stepping into the hushed corridors beneath flickering fluorescent lights, Marin felt a thrill of nervousness she hadn't anticipated. As they passed the entrance to the indoor swimming pool, she paused, mesmerized by the way the water's surface shimmered under the overhead glow, a sight she had never studied closely, let alone ventured into. Ignoring Gojou's cautious reminders, she knelt at the pool's edge, convinced that a gentle dip of her toes could be harmless. Instead, a sudden misstep sent her tumbling past the shallow end into deeper water. Gojou reacted instantly, diving in to pull her to safety before panic could fully set in. Only then did Marin gasp that she didn't know how to swim. Wrapped in a towel poolside, she admitted that while she loved beach outings, chatting with friends, snacking seaside, photographing the interplay of sand and sunlight on waves, she'd never learned proper strokes. Gojou listened with understanding, likening her courage to his own perseverance in practicing with the Hina dolls despite repeated setbacks. Once their clothes were drying and laughter had dispelled the tension, Marin grinned and promised Gojou she'd invite him to the first festival she discovered, provided he continued helping her tackle the toughest parts of her homework. Indeed, Marin kept her promise, inviting Gojou to the first festival she discovered once she finished her homework a few days later. Upon arriving at the lively festival grounds, Gojou briefly feared that Marin might struggle to locate him among the dense, animated crowd, yet his worry dissipated immediately when she appeared with a confidence that stood out like a beacon. To his astonishment, Marin had chosen a delicate yukata, its patterns complementing her features and making her look exceptionally beautiful in his eyes, though he hesitated to admit his admiration aloud. Marin, in turn, suspected he appreciated the way her neckline was framed, so she playfully emphasized it throughout their time together, hoping to capture his attention with every subtle movement and warming his heart. Before he knew it, Gojou found himself scarcely able to match Marin's boundless energy as she enthusiastically purchased every edible delight she encountered. Once she completed her shopping, they headed to the plaza to savor their treats while waiting for fireworks. It was, in truth, Gojou's first festival experience. He watched in awe as each vivid burst illuminated the sky close above, having only seen distant displays from his room before. In that glowing moment, his eyes met Marin's, the atmosphere thick with intimacy and gentle excitement. After enjoying ice cream together, Marin playfully revealed her blue tongue to her liege, capping their enchanting evening with a whimsical surprise. Now that the fireworks had ended, Marin finally had the chance to sit down and soothe her aching feet, as her sandal straps had left their mark on her skin. Because Gojou considered getting her some bandages, she asked him to accompany her to the nearby convenience store. Along the way, they continued chatting about the memorable evening and how much fun they enjoyed despite the minor mishaps at the conclusion. Nevertheless, Marin expressed her eagerness to join Gojou at future fireworks festivals next year, which brought him relief and anticipation for more shared adventures. While Gojou prepared for sleep, Marin unexpectedly called to steady her nerves after being frightened by rewatching that horror film they'd viewed together recently. Alone in her quiet apartment, every creak unnerved her so thoroughly that she hadn't even bothered to dry her hair. Learning this, Gojou offered comforting words with a soothing tone, yet Marin insisted he continue chatting about anything until her tension eased. As they conversed, Marin lamented that summer vacation had ended too soon, since she'd planned more enjoyable activities like revisiting Prez Host episodes with friends, earning money through modeling gigs, and crafting elaborate cosplay designs. Eventually, Gojou's voice trailed off as he drifted to sleep, which Marin noticed before gathering courage to confess her feelings. After figuring that he was asleep, she gently ended the call, leaving her heart light despite uncertainty about his response. That concludes the anime recap. As always, if you enjoyed, let me know down below, and I'm out.